over 50% of the verbs you use every single day belong to just one tense.
Yeah, which is kind of mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it.
Right. I mean, think about the sheer scale of that for a second.
Hmm.
Half of your entire verbal output, whether you're ordering coffee or negotiating with a client or, just talking to your family, it's all governed by a single grammatical structure.
Exactly.
We call it the present simple, but well, here is the massive catch. It almost never describes the actual present. And honestly, the way it secretly controls our language is it's anything but simple.
It really is like the ultimate linguistic paradox. We're talking about the invisible load-bearing architecture of English here.
Yeah.
Because when you hear the word present, right, you instinctively picture a snapshot, like a laser pointer aimed directly at this exact singular microsecond in time.
Right. Happening right now.
Exactly. But when you examine the actual mechanics of the language, that laser pointer just immediately shatters. I mean, we use the so-called present tense to dictate the future, to relive the past, and to describe these massive cosmic realities that just never change at all.
Which is wild. So welcome to today's deep dive. Whether you are brushing up for an English exam or trying to refine your professional communication or you're just insanely curious about the hidden gears turning inside the words you speak every day, you are going to want to hear this.
Oh, absolutely.
We are decoding the absolute foundation of English grammar. We're going to map out the core rules, expose the microscopic traps that, instantly give away a non-native speaker, and uncover how journalists and sports broadcasters actually manipulate this tense to hack your emotions.
And, if we want to truly understand how to wield this grammatical tool, we really have to start by tearing down the name itself.
Yeah, the name is terrible.
It's a terrible, highly misleading label. Present simple. It creates this immediate misunderstanding in a learner's mind about when the action is actually taking place.
Right, because it doesn't actually care about what you're doing right this second. The true domain of this tense is entirely different, isn't it?
Exactly. It governs habits, routines, general truths, and permanent states.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, if you tell someone, Pauline practices the piano every day, you aren't saying Pauline is sitting at the bench with her fingers on the keys at this very moment.
Right, she could be at the grocery store.
Exactly. You're establishing a routine. Or consider general truths, right? Statements like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Or the Earth moves around the sun 150 million kilometers away. These aren't fleeting actions happening right now. They're immutable facts. They stretch infinitely backward and forward in time.
And it's the same for permanent states, too, right? Like if I say, she lives in Manchester.
Precisely. It operates on that exact same principle of an enduring reality.
There's a brilliant way to conceptualize this difference from our sources. I love this. Think of the present simple as a calendar, and its counterpart, the present continuous, as a stopwatch.
Oh, the calendar versus the stopwatch. That is the perfect lens for this.
Right. The calendar tracks the regular, the factual, the permanent, but the stopwatch tracks the temporary, in-progress actions ticking away right now, like, I am writing an email.
Yeah, the continuous tense is your laser pointer. It requires a start, a duration, and a stop. Like writing an email is an active process you can pause and resume.
Right.
But the calendar tense, the present simple, it requires a much broader, almost, philosophical view of reality.
Okay, but wait. If the stopwatch tracks things happening right now, why are we completely forbidden from using it with certain verbs?
You mean state of verbs?
Yes, state of verbs, words like know, believe, love, understand. Because, if I'm currently in the state of knowing something, why does it sound completely broken to say, I am knowing the answer, I'm literally doing it right now?
Well, it's because knowing isn't a mechanical process you execute, right? Stative verbs represent deep internal states of being or conditions of the mind. You can't just start and stop them at will with a click of a stopwatch.
That makes sense.
Right. You either know the answer or you don't. You either believe a concept or you don't. You can't be in the process of belonging to a club. You just belong.
Right, right.
And that is why the language demands the calendar tense for these concepts. I know the answer. I love this pie. These are states of existence, not active maneuvers.
Which is perfectly logical until you hear native speakers deliberately breaking this rule to be polite.
Oh, the polite softener.
Yes. You hear people take a stative verb like hope or wonder and force it onto the stopwatch. Like, instead of saying, I hope you can help me, which is a hard, permanent fact, they say, I was hoping you could help me, or I am wondering.
It's a fascinating psychological quirk of English, isn't it? By forcing a permanent state into the continuous tense, you actually introduce this sense of temporary fragility.
Wow, temporary fragility.
Yeah, it softens the statement. Because a hard fact like I want or I hope can feel really demanding.
Almost aggressive, yeah, especially in a professional setting.
Exactly. So by using the continuous tense, you make the desire seem fleeting, less rigid, which the listener then interprets as deference and politeness.
That's incredible. We're literally softening reality to avoid sounding rude. Okay, so we understand the domain of the calendar. Let's look at the actual architecture, like the mechanics of how we build these sentences, because this is where the system completely breaks down for a lot of learners.
Right. And it's called simple because the affirmative form is usually ruthlessly efficient.
Right.
Unlike other tenses that require a whole string of helper words, the present simple usually relies on just a single root word.
Hmm.
I write, you go, we sleep. It strips communication down to the absolute minimum required to convey meaning.
Right, until you hit the single most dangerous structural hazard in the entire language.
The third-person singular trap.
Exactly. The he, she, it pronoun group.
Yes. When the subject shifts to a singular third party, the verb suddenly morphs. You have to append an as or as to the base word. So play becomes plays. Wash becomes washes. Study becomes studies.
And it seems like such a microscopic detail, right? Just one tiny little consonant, but forgetting that I was like saying she walked to school every day instead of she walks. It's the ultimate linguistic tell.
Oh, absolutely.
It instantly signals to the listener that the speaker is non-native. I mean, the English ear is hypersensitive to the absence of that tiny hissing sound at the end of the action.
It acts as an anchor for the listener. And, the confusion is entirely understandable because it defies the logic we learn for nouns.
Oh, how so?
Well, we're trained from childhood to put an as on nouns to make them plural. One car, two cars. But verbs operate on the exact opposite logic.
Oh, right.
Yeah, plural subjects aggressively reject the as. You say the dogs bark. You never say the dogs barks. The as on the verb is strictly reserved for the singular, isolated third-person subject.
Okay, well, I have to push back on this idea of efficiency you mentioned earlier.
Okay, go for it.
You said the present simple is ruthlessly efficient. And that's only true until you want to ask a question or make a negative statement. The moment you want to say no, the sentence suddenly sprouts these phantom auxiliary verbs out of nowhere.
Ah, yes.
We go from he likes chocolate to does he like chocolate, or he doesn't like chocolate.
Yeah.
Like, where do and does come from, and why on earth do we need them if the tense is so simple?
Okay, so that is the phenomenon known as do support. And it actually reinforces the idea of efficiency if you look at it structurally. Think of it as delegating the heavy lifting.
Delegating.
Yeah. In English, we like our main verbs to remain clean and unburdened. The main verb conveys the core meaning, liking, running, sleeping. It isn't designed to carry the structural weight of a negative particle like not, or to physically jump to the front of a sentence to signal a question.
So we basically hire a contractor.
Precisely. We bring in do or does as a mechanical engine. It steps in purely to handle the syntax, leaving the main verb alone to deliver the meaning. But, as you noted, this delegation creates a massive trap for learners.
The double trap.
Yes, specifically the double as trap, because once the contractor shows up, the main verb gets to completely relax.
It just clocks out.
Exactly. When you bring in does to do the heavy lifting for a third-person singular subject, the does absorbs that critical tie as we were just talking about. So the main verb must revert to its naked base form.
Right, so you can't say he does plays.
No, absolutely not. The as has already been handled by the helper verb. It must be does he play or he doesn't play. Duplicating that as is a structural collision.
Wow, wait, okay, if the rule is that we always delegate the heavy lifting to do and does, what about the verb to be?
Oh, the great rebel.
Right, it's the absolute most common foundational verb in the language am, is, are. But it never uses do or does. If I want to ask a question, I don't say, do you be hungry? I just flip it. Are you hungry? Or for a negative, I am not. If to be is the oldest, most foundational verb we have, shouldn't it set the standard for everything else? Why is it the one verb that completely ignores the rules?
Well, being the oldest is exactly why it ignores the rules. To be is a linguistic fossil.
Fossil.
Yeah, it existed long before English standardized this neat, efficient system of do support. It is so deeply embedded in our psychology and our daily usage that it just refused to be
It's
modernized.
too big to fail.
Exactly. It continues to operate on an ancient syntax where the verb itself just jumps to the front of the sentence. It plays by its own archaic rules because it's the bedrock of the language itself.
Which means we just have to accept its rebellion. Okay, so we have this foundation that handles timeless routines, habits, and facts. But a calendar is useless without dates and frequencies.
Sure.
We need specific tools to attach a sense of time to these permanent states, which brings us to adverbs of frequency. And looking at how these operate, it is astonishing how mathematically rigid English tries to be about chaotic human behavior.
Oh, it's a strict quantification of routine. The language provides this descending percentage scale to map exactly how often a habit occurs.
Right.
At the absolute ceiling, you have 100% certainty. Always. As in, I always go to bed before 11. At the floor, you have 0%. Never. And between those two absolutes, we have highly specific gradations to quantify our lives.
Yeah, like you drop to 90% with usually 80% is normally down to often at 70, hitting the coin flip of 50% with sometimes.
Is there?
And then the descent continues through seldom at 10%, all the way down to hardly ever at 5%, just before you hit absolute zero.
And just as rigid as the mathematical scale are the syntax homes for these words. They have assigned seating within a sentence.
Right, you can't just put them anywhere.
No, you can't. The primary architectural rule is that an indefinite frequency adverb must sit directly before the main verb. You say, I always remember. He normally gets good marks. The adverb modifies the action by physically preceding it.
Unless, of course, the verb is our ancient fossil friend, to be.
Naturally, because to be operates on its own logic, the adverb is forced to sit after it. They are never pleased. She isn't usually bad-tempered. The verb is just too strong to be preceded by the modifier.
That makes sense. And there's also a hard boundary on how you can launch a thought, right? You can begin a sentence with the middle ground words like usually or sometimes.
Right.
For instance, sometimes I forget to check my email. But you are grammatically forbidden from starting a sentence with the absolutes. You cannot start with always or never. Saying always I go to bed early completely fractures the sentence structure.
It does. The absolute adverbs must remain embedded within the core syntax, anchored to the subject and the verb. And to add one more layer of structural integrity, the low-end absolutes like hardly ever and never carry their own negative weight.
Oh, right, the double negative rule.
Yeah, they can only pair with positive verbs. You cannot say, I don't never swim. English rejects the double negative. The negation is entirely contained within the adverb itself, I never swim.
Okay, let's look at a truly bizarre application of all these rules. Because we've firmly established that the present simple is the calendar. It maps facts, routines, and permanent states.
Yeah.
But we actually use this exact same tense to hack the timeline and talk about the future. For example, the train leaves at 6:30, or our holiday starts on the 26th of March. Both of those events are happening tomorrow or next month.
Right.
So how is a listener supposed to know whether to use the present simple calendar or the present continuous stopwatch when discussing the future?
So the deciding metric here isn't time, it is control.
Control.
Yeah. To choose the right tense for the future, you have to ask yourself, who owns the schedule? As a structural rule of thumb, you deploy the present simple for fixed timetables and public schedules.
Like flights and trains.
Exactly. The train leaving, the seminar starting at 11, the flight departing. You do not personally control these events. They are massive institutional realities. Because they're scheduled by an external authority, the language treats them as unshakable facts. Thus, they get the present simple. The flight leaves at 1840.
Even if the flight isn't for another 3 weeks, the schedule itself exists right now as a permanent fact.
Precisely. The schedule is the reality. But contrast that with personal arrangements, things you do control, things you have negotiated with other people.
Okay, so that's where the stopwatch comes in.
Yes. For personal diary entry, you switch to the present continuous. You would not say, we meet the team tomorrow at 10. You say, we are meeting the team tomorrow at 10. It's an arrangement you made, not a public timetable dictated to you.
The calendar versus the stopwatch applies perfectly here, too. The public timetable is the grand immutable calendar. Your personal meeting is your own temporary stopwatch.
It really is a brilliant distinction. It reveals how much authority we give to institutional schedules versus our own personal plans.
Yeah, it really does. So we've covered immutable facts, mathematics, and public schedules. These all seem very, cold and logical. But the present simple actually has a deeply emotional, theatrical side,
Oh,
too.
absolutely does.
It's deployed as a secret weapon by journalists, by sports broadcasters, and basically by anyone who wants to bypass your logical brain and inject pure adrenaline into a sentence.
Right, because when you want to create urgency, you manipulate the perception of time. Let's examine print journalism.
Yeah.
Major news outlets constantly use the present simple to describe events that are firmly concluded in the past.
Okay, there's a perfect example of this from our sources. It's a BBC headline from December of the year 2000, and the headline reads, Gore pins hopes on Florida court. Now, just to be perfectly clear to you listening, we are analyzing this strictly as a historical, grammatical artifact. We are not taking any political stance on the content of the 2000 election.
Of course. Purely grammatical.
Right. But grammatically, Al Gore had already appealed to the court. The action was finished. So why does the headline use the present simple to say he pins his hopes instead of the past tense pinned?
Because the past tense feels concluded. It feels safe and distant.
Mm-hmm.
By replacing the past tense with the present simple, the journalist drags the event out of history and forces it to unfold right in front of your eyes.
Wow.
It's known as the narrative present. It tricks the reader's brain into feeling like the story is an active, unresolved crisis happening at this exact second.
And add to that the fact that headlines aggressively delete words to save physical space on the page. They drop articles like a and the, and they strip out all the auxiliary helper verbs we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it becomes pure concentrated action.
It really does. It's maximum narrative efficiency designed to grab your attention. And we experience this exact same psychological trick when we listen to live sports commentary, don't we?
Oh, totally. The play-by-play announcer.
Right. When a broadcaster is calling a match, they don't say, he is passing to the striker, he is shooting, he is scoring. They use the absolute simplest form. He passes, he shoots, he scores. It makes the physical events feel impossibly rapid fire.
Yeah, if they use the continuous tense, the action would feel bogged down in process. The present simple creates a breathless, staccato effect. You're experiencing the physical facts the microsecond they snap into reality. It is incredibly dramatic.
It is. But the drama isn't just for broadcasters. We use it in everyday conversation to build social tension, specifically through something called tag questions.
Ah, yes. Tag questions.
This is where you state a fact and then staple a tiny inverted question to the very end of the sentence to force the person listening to agree with you. Like, John likes me, doesn't he? Or, those boys don't play sports, do they?
Right.
The structural rule is that if your main sentence is positive, the tiny tag at the end has to be negative. And if your sentence is negative, the tag flips to positive.
And think about the underlying psychology of that structure. You're using the present simple to establish what you believe is a concrete reality. But human beings are deeply social creatures. We crave validation.
We do.
So we use that inverted tag to demand social confirmation. You're essentially saying, here is the reality of the universe. Please confirm that you see it too. It's a highly sophisticated social maneuver disguised as a simple grammar rule.
That's fascinating. But, okay, I'm going to push back on this entire framework for a second.
Okay.
We have spent this whole deep dive establishing that the calendar, the present simple, is for facts, routines, and permanent realities. And the stopwatch, the present continuous, is for temporary action.
Correct.
But what happens when human frustration boils over? There is an ultimate rule breaker that just shatters this boundary. People constantly combine the stopwatch tense with the absolute 100% frequency adverb always, as in you are always losing your keys. According to the structural rules we just laid out, that sentence shouldn't exist. Always is a permanent calendar word, but you are losing is a temporary stopwatch phrase.
It's a brilliant contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
And you're entirely correct. It deliberately fractures standard grammatical law. But it fractures it for a profoundly human reason. To signal intense emotional irritation.
Okay, how so?
Well, when you combine the continuous tense with an absolute frequency adverb like always or constantly, you are abandoning neutral observation. You're launching a complaint.
Because if I use the proper grammar, the present simple, it strips all the emotion out of it. Saying, you always lose your keys, just sounds like I'm reading a weather report.
Exactly.
It's just a neutral fact about your routine. It is Tuesday, you lost your keys.
Right, which means the language has to adapt to express your annoyance. By twisting the grammar and saying, you are always losing your keys, You use the continuous tense to make the listener feel the relentless, inescapable nature of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes the action feel like it's suffocating you, right now, in this moment, without end. It is grammar physically bending to accommodate human frustration.
We literally bend the rules of space and time just to complain about our roommates. I think that is the most human thing I have ever heard.
It really is.
So let's zoom out and look at the architectural marvel we've been exploring today. The so-called simple present is actually an incredibly sophisticated operating system.
It's the bedrock of English. It manages to encompass timeless scientific truths, the rigid mathematics of our daily habits, the unyielding authority of public schedules, and the breathless, manufactured urgency of breaking news.
And for you listening, the next time you scan a news headline or negotiate a meeting time with a colleague or even just describe your morning routine, you're going to see the hidden gears turning.
Absolutely.
You'll recognize the phantom engine of do support, you'll hear the microscopic third persons that anchors the sentence, and you will know instantly whether you are operating on the public calendar or your own personal stopwatch.
You now understand the invisible physics that give the English language its structure and its subtle emotional leverage.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to carry with you. We established at the very beginning that over 50% of the verbs we use in spoken English are in this present simple tense.
Yeah.
A tense specifically engineered to describe permanent states, immutable facts, and rigid routines, rather than what is dynamically happening right this very second. So what does that massive statistical dominance say about human nature? Are we fundamentally creatures of habit, spending the vast majority of our waking lives communicating about our fixed realities and repetitive routines, rather than actually living in the laser pointer present moment? Something to chew on the next time you catch yourself explaining what you always do. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.